Hello, everyone. Welcome to Revival Lost Southern Voices. We are a festival for readers where we celebrate historically excluded, erased, or marginalized Southern authors whose works are out of print or otherwise do not receive the attention they deserve. I'm Gina Flowers, an Associate Chair of English at Georgia State University and Director for Revival Lost Southern Voices. We are very glad that you are here today. Um, Revival is a collaboration between Georgia State University Perimeter College and Georgia Center for the Book with Joe Davidge and Allie Stonewright. And by the end of our 3-day festival, we hope you leave here with a long reading list of books and authors and new voices that you haven't thought about reading before or maybe haven't thought about in a long time. So that is our goal for the festival, is that you leave with a good reading list. Our program is a digital program this year. There is a QR code sometimes on this screen and all the time at the round table by the door. Please scan that QR code and look over all the voices that are in our program this year. We also archive all of our panels, and that's at the Georgia Center for the Book on their YouTube channel, and they go back to 2021 there. So please peruse the archive at Georgia Center for the Book. Our moderator for today's session, which is celebrating the life and work of Tina Ansa. Our moderator today, too many papers, is Jennifer Colatosti. She is an associate professor and interim associate department chair of English at Perimeter College, Georgia State. She writes and occasionally publishes fiction and creative nonfiction. Some of her work can be found in Change 7 magazine, Tinge magazine, Midwestern Gothic, Sequestrum, and Southeast Review. And before we start, I want to go ahead and invite you to a reception or snacks, I suppose, right outside after this session. And I also want to invite you to our 3 o'clock session. We'll be talking about children's book authors and illustrators today at 3 o'clock. And there is also a gallery exhibit up on the 4th floor of children's book illustrators. And if you'd like to see that, just see me. Talk to anybody. Talk to Jen or me or Joe or Allie and or Andy. Andy's here too, one of our founders of Lost Southern Voices back in 2016. So we'd love for you to see that display up on the 4th floor gallery too. And as we start, we're going to start with a bit of a video that is about Tina, and I think you're on it too, or is it just Tina? So it's just Tina Ansa, and we're going to start with that video, and then we'll turn it over to Jen to moderate. So thank you for being here, and let's celebrate the life of Tina McElroy Ansa. Thank you.
A writer friend of mine told me when I first started writing, we were talking, and I was talking about my mother making grits every morning, and sitting around the dinner table and going to the hairdresser, and just all these kinds of things that were in some of my stories. And he stopped me and he said, Tina, that's gold, G-O-L-D. And I think of the gold running through all of us like a vein, But gold doesn't mean anything unless you mine it, get it out of the ground. Then you got to make sure it's not fool's gold, it's real gold. Then you make it into something, you refine it, with fire. Then you make it into jewelry or a goblet or, whatever you're going to make it into, use it in art. But that's when it becomes valuable, when you go in and mine it. I have 2 words for you. Are you ready? Right now. That's it. Right now. Those 2 words can change your life. If there's anything you're dreaming of becoming, of doing, of having, of achieving, of sharing, or giving, right now. Those are the words. Think about it. right now. I grew up in Macon, Georgia in the 50s and 60s, at the time when African-American people told stories all the time, sitting on the porch, at funerals, at weddings, after church on Sunday. They told stories to calm children down to go to sleep. These stories were all around. My father owned juke joints and liquor stores, and I used to go after school. I'd go to Catholic school, and I would go down after school with my little plaid uniform on and sit at the counter next to winos and prostitutes and regular people and boosters and pickpockets and the principal of the school. I mean, when I was growing up, everybody sort of went to the juke joint. It wasn't, a sort of underworld kind of place to be. It was a place where people just gathered. So I had all these people around me and all these stories, and I would hear people just talking. I'm a big eavesdropper. And so I would overhear stories, and so the stories just seemed to be everywhere. Books and ideas and words were important in my house. And by my mother's bedside table, there were books. And she had a reading chair, a big pink sitting chair in the living room. And that was her reading chair. And so she loved being a mother. She was a very accessible mother, but not when she was reading. And that made a big impression on me. So I'm a writer for all those reasons, because I think I was given a gift of the talent to be able to write. But the biggest gift I was given was to know how important words are, how important stories are. I graduated from Spelman College in Atlanta, Georgia in 1971. And although I have many, many wonderful memories of Spelman, the one that stands out in my mind is the moment when I knew I was a writer. That's where it happened. Dr. Gloria Wade Gales, an author, a poet, at the time was just out of graduate school teaching her first college courses. And she taught me African American literature. I did a paper on Zora Neale Hurston, who had just been rediscovered at the time. This was in the late 60s, early 70s. And I got an A on the paper. And when I went to Dr. Gales to tell her how excited I was about the paper, she said the most important words that have ever been spoken to me. She said, "You're a writer, don't you know that?" And although I had always known I was a writer, although growing up in Macon, Georgia, I was always told I was going to be a writer. My family always said, Tina's going to be a writer. Anytime they caught me reading a book, anytime John Oliver Killings, who grew up in Macon, Georgia, was mentioned, went to school with my father, anytime he was mentioned, someone would say, well, Tina's going to be a writer. I heard it my whole life, but I had never heard it from a professor. I'd never heard it from a writer. And she said it so matter-of-factly, don't you know you're a writer? I was a journalist. From the time I was out of college until now, I still consider myself a journalist. That was my first job. I was an editor, copy editor at the Atlanta Constitution in 1971. I was the first black woman at the Atlanta Constitution, if you can believe it. Like many people, I found that it was very difficult for me to hold down a full-time job and to write. People will say, especially if you work for a newspaper, well, you've just been writing all day, just come home and continue to write. My God, the hardest thing in the world, not only to make the transition from journalism to fiction, for instance, is a very hard transition to make, but also just how tired you are. You have to be fresh, and you have to be thoughtful, and you want to create something wonderful. It's very difficult to. And so I found that I had to take a break. My husband was very instrumental in this. He told me, I tell you what, I'll handle the household stuff. I'll handle making some money so we can eat and have a roof over our heads. And, if you're going to write, you're going to be serious about this, going to be serious. And that's what I did. I took some time off and concentrated on my fiction. Drove from Atlanta down here, and when we got here, it was nighttime. The day after we got married, my husband, Shanae, and I. And when we drove across the bridge, it was just a two-lane drawbridge from the mainland to St. Simon's. It's a causeway now, but it was just a two-lane drawbridge. And just as we got past the marina, just as we got on the island, I heard a man's voice that said, "This is where you belong." And I've told that story a lot, and I forget when I tell it for the first time just how unusual that is. I've kind of got used to it. And I know a lot of people say, yeah, you're just embossing because, you're a writer and all of that. But it wasn't. It was a man's voice. I couldn't tell whether it was a black man or a white man. It wasn't a booming voice, but it was a male voice. And it said, "This is where you belong." And so I looked at my husband who was driving, and he looked at me. And I didn't say anything because this didn't happen to me every day. This was unusual. And so he said, "What was that?" And so I said, "What was what?" And then he said, "I don't know. It was something." I said, "Did you hear a voice?" He said, "No, it wasn't a voice." He said, "It wasn't music." He said, "I don't know what it was. It was a sound, something I heard." And that's when I told him I heard this man's voice. And from that moment on, this is in 78, I knew that this is where I was supposed to be. And my father brought me home one time. We didn't have a working car when we first sometimes when we got here. And I would get on a Greyhound bus and go to Macon, my home. I went there for a workshop with John Oliver Killings, who I mentioned earlier, who was from Macon. He came back after like 45 years and did workshops in Macon. And all you had to do was have a piece of work. You had to show that you had something that you were working on, a work in progress. It could be anything. And you got into this workshop for free. And, I did that. During the workshop, I had a story that became a chapter in my first book, Baby of the Family. And it was about a little girl going up the street to get her hair done at the neighborhood beauty shop. It was in the back of somebody's house. And because he went there because she was tender-headed and nobody could stand to hear her. So she had big, thick red hair and nobody could stand to hear her cry. And I would send it off and get rejection because nobody was, publishing short stories by unpublished authors, and that's where I was. I sent it to Toni Morrison at Random House, and she sent me a nice note back. But they were all rejected, and so this was probably what I had been sending off. And so he read it, and we were sitting all close to him. Everybody was at his feet because he was just so wonderful. And so he had read my story, or maybe I read it aloud. And he looked down at me. I was sitting at his feet. And he said, Beebe McElroy's daughter. That's my dad. They call him Beebe. Beebe McElroy's daughter, a writer. And then he said, a good one, too. Oh, my God. I can still feel how thrilling that was. I wanted to we were sitting around. I was like sitting literally at his feet. I just wanted to grab him around his feet and just hug him. But I was, too in awe to do that. But it was just that feeling. So I had those, that sort of written when I came here. And from that, I realized that I could write. I had a writer friend, Bill Deal, who was a big deal. He was an established writer, and, he said, hey, you read what I'd shown John Oliver Killings. And he says, oh, this is great. He says, if you give me 100 pages, he said, I'll show it to my agent. And his agent at the time was Owen Laster, and Owen Laster was head of the literary department at William Morris. And so and Bill did. I got about 130 pages because it got good to me. And we sent them off, and I got my first agent was a William Morris agent.
Okay, thank you, Joe. So it's my pleasure to moderate this panel and introduce Wanda Smalls Lloyd. So born in Savannah, Georgia, Wanda Smalls Lloyd became one of the nation's highest-ranking newspaper journalists and one of the first African-American women to be the top editor of a major newspaper. In her memoir, Coming Full Circle from Jim Crow to Journalism, Lloyd reflects on her upbringing in coastal Savannah, Georgia. Despite segregated social, community, and educational systems, Lloyd's Southern upbringing, steeped in religious and home training, strong cultural foundations, and early leadership opportunities, produced an adult woman who realized her professional dream of working for daily newspapers and rose to become an editor at the Washington Post and a senior editor at USA Today before returning south as the executive editor of the Montgomery Advisor. Lloyd is an advocate and example for how diversity helped newsrooms become reflections of accuracy for their audience. Lloyd is now a retired newspaper editor and a former associate professor and former chair of the Department of Journalism and Mass Communications at Savannah State University in Savannah, Georgia. Lloyd met Tina McElroy Ansa in September 1967 at Spelman College in Atlanta at the height of the civil rights and Black Power movements. They were assigned as freshman year roommates Ansa from Macon, Georgia, and Lloyd from Savannah, Georgia. Both were English majors and word nerds and began their careers in newspaper journalism. Their lifelong relationship as friends and supportive colleagues as writers and editors produced many collaborations. Okay. Welcome, everybody. I didn't see you come in. So here to talk with us today is Wanda Smalls Lloyd, and she's put together a PowerPoint with some pictures and memories of Tina, and we're just going to kind of go through and talk about them. So is there anything you'd like to say about the title slide? And we can
Sure. These are Tina's 5 novels, and each one is a signed copy of the first edition. And she taught me early on, always keep a first edition of any novel. And so these are on the shelf in my living room. The elephants, they have a little significance to me from a sorority standpoint, but I just like the elephants. I think I bought them myself. But when I had 2 books to put there, because I needed bookmarks, book stand holder, I thought, okay, this is perfect. They'll hold up her books, not knowing that there would be 3, 4, and 5. Yeah.
Okay, next slide.
So these are the books, the book titles, and in order. Baby of the Family, it was published in 1989. That's what she was talking about in the video. And some of the video is old, and for some reason the sound is a little distorted. Ugly Ways in 93, The Hand I Fan With in 96, You Know Better in 99, and Taking After Madeir in 2007. So those are her books. These pictures were taken for the AJC, by the AJC. There was an article in February 2024 that they came to St. Simon's Island where Tina lived, and they had a professional photographer take the pictures. So I thought that was pure Tina toward the end of her life.
Is that Tina in her home with the books, or is that somewhere?
That is in her home. Yeah.
Yeah, those are cool pictures.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. What would you like to tell us about the early years of Tina's life?
Well, I didn't know Tina in the early years. As the bio said, we met in September of 1967. We were assigned as roommates. We actually got a letter. When I say a letter, I mean snail mail letter saying, congratulations, your roommate is Tina McElroy. And she got one saying, your roommate is Wanda Smalls. And so we communicated by letter through the summer. And we talked about, anticipating that we would be together. We talked about how we would decorate the room and the fact that we were English majors. So it was very personal. But these are some photos that I found. I had I won't say pleasure, honor of planning her memorial service, which was held here in Atlanta in November. She passed away in September of last year. And so I dug up some pictures from the internet. She is the baby of her family, was the baby of her family. There were 5 children. And so she is the baby being held there in the center. That's Tina with her siblings and her parents, Walter and Nellie. Her name actually is Waltina. And she had a brother named Walter. So clearly her dad liked his name and he wanted some more Walls in the family. And this is Tina with her older sister, Marion, sitting on, looks like a porch or a stoop or something. But that's just an adorable picture of her when she was very young. And then these 2, this is Tina on the right, dancing, taking little dance lessons. And then this is the Tina that I met, because I'm sure that was in her teenage years, but with the thick eyebrows and the long dark hair. This is the Tina that I met in 1967. I think it was before college, but still, she looked exactly like that when we met. This is Tina and her husband. Her husband, Jonee, Jonee, passed away in January of 2020, just before COVID. So he did not die from COVID, but he was sick a lot in 2019, so she was his caregiver. Jonee, like my husband, was a Vietnam veteran, and so our husbands bonded over that when they met. I think they met in. They may have met in Atlanta because he was a police officer in Atlanta for a time, and then they went to Charlotte, where he was a police officer, and then they moved to Annapolis, Maryland, where he was a police officer. He later became a filmmaker. But you talk about 2 people in love. They were always together. Tina did not like to drive, so he drove her everywhere she needed to go, whether it was to the grocery store or across the country. Janae was the driver. And so our husbands became very good friends. They played poker together and just they would sit up all night when Tina and her husband would visit us and watch westerns on TV.
And were you and Tina not there for the Western film
We
viewing?
were in the kitchen or somewhere else in the house just talking about writing. We were always just talking about writing and journalism. So yeah. And this is just covers of the book. That's the first 3 books, and then the next slide is the other 2 books.
Do you have a favorite of her 5 novels?
Well, I have 2. Baby of the Family and Ugly Ways are the 2 that I remember the most. A lot of people like The Hand I Fan With because it's very erotic. I don't know where that came from, but she somehow
You're
figured
like,
out.
whoa.
I know, right? Is this really the Tina I know? Those. The Hand I Fan With. So the main character in The Hand I Fan With is a guy named Herman, and I did not know. And he was a ghost. He was the woman. The main character was single, and she was conjuring up the ideal man, and she would have dreams about him, and so his name was Herman, and I didn't know until about 2 years ago that the name Herman came from her man. I just found she just told me that a little while ago. So, um,
Okay, so I know that Tina founded the Sea Island Writers Retreat. Let's see, I don't know what specific questions I have. Do you know like what inspired her to start it and like where that came from and what her goal for it was and maybe just how the retreat ended up going for all those years?
Absolutely. She founded it in 2004 on Sapelo Island, which is off the coast of Georgia, of course. She found, as a writer in the 80s, she found that there were writers' retreats, and she went to some, but she didn't feel that they had the cultural significance to her writing and her life and her style. And so she decided, I'm just going to start my own writers' retreat because she really was, as are many writers, passionate about mentoring young, emerging writers. And so she invented her own writers' retreat. The first one was on Sapelo. The last one was in November of 2022, and it was on Tybee Island. And I co-produced it with her because I live in Savannah, and it was off the coast of Savannah. And she wanted to help because, we're 2 women of a certain age, and we can't do everything by ourselves anymore. So I'm more of the business person in our relationship, and she was more of the creative person. So I was able to handle all the business side of the retreat. And it was my first writers' retreat, and I had to ask her the same question at some point. Why a writers' retreat? Why do we need to do this?
And so did it run pretty much every year from 2004?
No, it didn't run every year, but she did several. She did several on islands, and she really wanted it to be about islands because of the atmosphere of the humidity and the Spanish moss and things that just denote island life. She was truly an island girl, even though she grew up in Macon. She became an island girl. The last one was and she also had 1 or 2 at Spelman College.
Oh yeah.
She had one. I invited her to Savannah State when I was chair of the Department of Journalism, and she did a retreat on the campus with some of our students.
Yeah, when you're talking about her like wanting the retreats to be like island centric and her being island girl, it makes me an island girl, it makes me think of there's one part in the video that we didn't see. But if you can find that whole memorial video on YouTube.
I'll tell you where it is when we finish.
Okay. Yeah, it's really great. But there's a part where she's talking about moving to St. Simon's Island, and as she and her husband are crossing the bridge, she says that she hears a voice that said, "What is it? This is where you belong. This is where you belong." Mm-hmm. Yeah. So anyway,
and she heard it. Her husband didn't hear it, but it was actually their honeymoon, and they were going to the island. She heard things, and they were going to the island just for the honeymoon, and they decided on their honeymoon that they were going to move to St. Simon. So they were there for 40 some years.
What can you tell us about Down South Press?
Well, like starting the writers retreat, she found that it was very difficult for Black writers, many Black writers, to get published traditionally through publishers. Now everybody's doing self-publishing, but she really, people weren't doing that at the time, and she really wanted to make a pathway to help other emerging writers by publishing also. And she called me one day. By that time, I was living in Montgomery, Alabama, and she called and she said, I have this idea for a publishing company. I just want to do my own. And she published her fifth novel through Down South Press. And she said, I'm trying to figure out how to promote it. I heard somebody over here saying she's in public relations. I've never done public relations, but she called me for the advice. And I said, well, you should launch it at a place that's culturally relevant. And in Montgomery, she had been to Montgomery before. I said, we have the Rosa Parks Museum. What's more culturally relevant than a museum named for Rosa Parks? And so she and Janae drove to Montgomery, and we had a press conference in the lobby. I reached out to the director, and so she started Down South Press. She did a few things under Down South Press in terms of mentoring other writers, but she never published another book by under the imprint of Down South Press until we did a book together, which we can talk about later in 2020. So the two books are the only two books that were published with the imprint, but she did a lot of work in the name of Down South Press. Yeah. So this is the writers' retreat. These are some photos from the writers' retreat. Food was a huge part of culture, and she wanted to be sure that we had some good Southern, culturally relevant food. And so we're with, I can't remember her first name, Robinson. She's a Gullah Geechee person on Defusky Island. And so we had her and one other chef from Charleston come and stay in one of the houses that we rented for the retreat and cook some very authentic food, because it gets your creative juices flowing when you're learning something in a place you want to experience the culture, including with food. The picture on the right was taken a few weeks before Tina came to the island just to see the locations where we were going to be. We rented 3 houses for the students and for the faculty. And so I took that picture because it was, it said Tybee Island. It says all the things you, I guess, don't do.
Yeah.
No fireworks, no smoking, no glass, no pets.
I know I've broken the no pets on the beach rule on time.
Yeah, I'm sure most people have. And then this is the class, one of the sessions where we were having a lecture. Tina's looking at her phone on the very left of that picture. And if you are familiar with Dolan Perkins Valdez, that's Dolan in the black and white looking at the camera. So this is a couple of projects that we have done together. The one on the left is Meeting at the Table, African American Women Write on Race, Culture, and Community. Tina called me on a day in June in 2020 after the deaths of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and Ahmaud Arbery, Ahmaud Arbery was right there in Brunswick near where St. Simon's is. And Tina always started her conversations when it was a joyful conversation with, hey, sweetie, how you doing? And she always expected me to say, I'm doing okay, everything's good. And I said, I'm not doing very well. I am sad, I am angry, I am frustrated. We had COVID by then, of course, and we were losing people through these tragic circumstances. And she said, well, what's the matter? And I told her why I wasn't feeling very good. And she said she was feeling some of the same emotions. And I said, and on top of that, I'm starting to get phone calls from some of my dear white friends who I've worked with in various newsrooms who are saying, oh my God, we had no idea that the racism that you've been talking to us about all these years is that bad. We just didn't know that people would chase down a young man on the street in Brunswick and shoot him just because he was running in the wrong neighborhood, or that somebody would hold their foot on George Floyd's neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds or whatever it was. And Breonna Taylor was shot in her bed, and they were just looking for somebody else. And we were very disturbed about it. So we talked about it for a while. She said she was hearing from some of her friends on St. Simon's Island the same thing. We didn't know that this could actually happen in 2020. And she said, well, what should we do about it? I said, well, it's COVID. I'm not getting out there in the street. That's for the young people. They're out there in their masks. I'm not going out there. We didn't have any vaccines by then. And she said, well, what should we do? And I said, well, I don't know. Maybe we should do what we do. We should write. And by the end of that conversation, which lasted about 4 hours on the phone, and that was not unusual for our conversations, we had come up with a plan to do a book. we had in 4 hours, we had the title of the book. We knew that it was going to be an anthology, that we would invite other Black women to write for it about their own experience with racism. I wrote one of the essays. Tina wrote a beautiful introduction to the book. That was her essay. We have, I think, a total of 15 or 16 essays in the book. We knew that we were not going to, we had a list of probably 25 people that we would ask, and then we split the list, and Tina reached out to some, I reached out to some. And within 3 or 4 days, we had the whole book planned with people already starting to write their essays. We asked them to send us an abstract to tell us what their essay was going to be. And then we had to plan, how are we going to edit this book? Well, we were in the age of Zoom meetings. This entire book was edited on Zoom. I would edit, we split up the writers, so I edited my half of the writers with the Zoom meetings, and Tina did the same thing. And then every evening we would come together, and Tina and I would look over the documents, and we would edit together, which I've never edited with someone like that, but it was a remarkable experience. Then we thought about how we would get it designed and all that, and we had great help from SCAD in Savannah College of Art and Design. They designed the book. We reached out to Cynthia St. James, who was an artist, and we asked her to write an essay. I knew Cynthia, and she said, I'm finishing up one of my own books of art, therefore I don't have time to write, but I'll just give you a piece of art for the cover. So she donated a piece of art. She sent us two paintings, or two images of paintings, and she said, just choose one. And so that's how the cover came together.
Such a nice.
And then the 2 old chicks. So after we did all that stuff on Zoom, we were sitting. That's my kitchen table, and Tina came to Savannah. We had not seen each other for 3 years when that picture was taken, and we were just sitting there planning. The book was already in production. We'd finished with the writing and the editing, and we were getting it printed, and we were just talking about how we're going to promote this book because of COVID. And my husband sort of came by and took that picture of us, and we started talking about Zoom and how much of a change it was for 2 old chicks to be on Zoom every day. And I was in love with podcasts by then. The first podcast I listened to was Michelle Obama, and I would tell Tina every day what the podcasts were. I think they came out weekly or bi-weekly or something like that. There were 5 podcasts. And I have a dog. I walk my dog, and I listen to podcasts. And she said, well, tell me about this podcast thing. What is it? I said, we should do a podcast. And so we created at the kitchen table the idea of having a podcast. And that's it. So we had to name it. Oh, Lord have mercy. We bounced around a lot of names. We came up with 2 old chicks. We talked, we started with 2 old broads, and I was like, no, that's too negative. But the 2 old chicks, and then we looked it up on Google, and there is another podcast called 2 Old Chicks, and it's about something totally different, but it's written out TWO. So we knew we had to use the number 2, which was fine. So if you ever want to search it online, I'll just put in number 2 Old Chicks, and the rest will come up. And then we said, we know a lot of stuff. We know it. We had a lot of wisdom. We were in our 70s by then, and Tina wanted to name it 2 Old Chicks Who Know a Lot of Shit. I am not a cursing person. So I held back for a while. So I called my daughter, who is a millennial, and I said, is there another word for shit? She said, ish. I had never heard that word. And she said, that doesn't have the same ring, Mom. I like Tina's title, 2 Old Chicks Who Know a Lot of Shit. That's how the title came. And we did about 2 years worth of podcasts every other week.
Was there any specific focus or theme to the podcast episodes, or would it just be what y'all wanted to talk about that day?
Well, it was largely what we wanted to talk about. However, we came up with 2 themes. One would be interviewing writers, but there were so many podcasts already interviewing writers, even interviewing just Black writers or just women writers or just Black women writers. There's a lot out there. The other thing that we talked about is wisdom, because we do know a lot of stuff. And so really, it was largely based on wisdom. We did have some interviews with wise people of a certain age, and then sometimes we would just talk. And the wisdom came from one night when we finished editing the book, when at the end of that night, we started talking about, I don't know, preserving our bodies. And I said, oh, my mother taught me how to preserve my face, but I didn't learn it until after my mother passed when I looked at her dresser and there were these very expensive bottles of cream on your face. And I said, hold on, wait a minute. So I ran to the bathroom and I grabbed up all my little bottles and I brought them and I showed it to her on the Zoom. And she ran to the bathroom and she got all her little bottles. And she said, my mom taught me the same thing about the better the product, the longer you can preserve your face and don't, wash your face in soap. And so that really is where we said that's when we started talking about wisdom, that we have some things that we could teach some of the younger people. It's kind of like to say, the babies ain't got to learn things on their own. We can help them with this. So this is just a clip from one of the podcasts. I put this in there because he's going to play us a really short clip from the podcast because we talked about our writing and what were some of your favorite things that you've written. And when I asked Tina the question, what's your favorite book or something like that, this is her response.
Ask you a question? Yes. Okay. So I know this is like picking your favorite child or your favorite cat, but of all your 5 novels, what is your favorite and why? Oh, okay. Now, Baby with Family is going to be very offended because she thinks that I will automatically pick her. Mm-hmm. But truly, my favorite and most impactful, and speaking of learning a lesson, the book that I really learned the most about is Ugly Ways, my second novel. The story of three women, sisters who come home to bury their self-centered mother who insists on being called Mud Dear. She's as far from a mother dear as she can get. She's very selfish. She decided to just not be the girl's mother and just withdraw. Actually, she decided to be free. And that's what the book is about. What does it mean? It means something special, I think, to formerly incarcerated, the descendants of formerly incarcerated people, to talk about freedom. And I think when Black people talk about freedom, when people of color talk about freedom, I think it resonates and means more than it will to the larger population. And that's what the book was about. But the book is my favorite because it's the book where I learned that books are safe places. I had no idea that up until that time how vital book clubs were and books. Because when you talk about books, it's completely different. You have a character to talk about, but you start out talking about the character and you always end up talking about yourself. That's when I learned that books can really heal. I learned that with this book, I bet you 85% of the people who I know who bought it and stood in line, signed and talked to me, said, this is the first time I'm telling you this about my mother. Because in Black cultures, you don't go out in the street talking about your mother now. You can talk about family stuff, but you don't talk about your mother. And so, lots of women just had their sisters or their, siblings or whoever, to talk about. And Black mothers are just as likely to be bad mothers as anybody else. So I learned a lot in writing the book, but I also learned just from the readers how much they felt like it was safe to talk about Mud Dear. And then, they kind of ended up talking about their mothers. It was, I had no idea how important a book was and how life-changing it could be. Because women would stand in line, the three women's names in the book, the daughters are Emily, Annie Ruth, and Betty Jean. And women would stand in line, for hours, because I sold more of this book than any other. And they would stand in line and they would lean down and ask the same thing. They would say something like, I'm Betty, who are you? And I would say, oh no. They took on the persona of one of the women, Betty, one of the 3 sisters. And I would, explain, in my little highfalutin way that this was fiction. And of course there was some similarities, la-di-da, la-di-dee, and this was fiction and it wasn't. And they would let me go on. And then one woman leaned down really close to my face and said, I'm Betty. Who are you? They really took this to heart and let me know that I wasn't writing my biography. I wasn't writing my life, but that these were real women. These are women that readers recognize. So that's Ugly Ways is my favorite book. And like I said, sold more copies than any of my books.
I really like that idea of like books as a safe space. Yeah. What a great
So if you, for those who don't know, in her characters sort of flowed through all her novels. All of them were written in a place called Mulberry, which is sort of patterned after Macon in Middle Georgia, the whole Middle Georgia culture. Um, and in ugly ways, Mama dies, and the three girls come back home to bury Mama, and they are just learning things about themselves. And Mama is talking from the grave. Mama said, "They're not gonna bury me in that old ugly thing, are they?" Things like that. So that's
Is this Tina on a moped?
so one day I got a text message from Tina, and I saw this picture, and I was like, "Okay, why is she on that bike? At least she has on a helmet. And what is that outfit she's got on?" She was a big gardener, so that was her gardening outfit, jumpsuit or something like that. And so I just didn't respond. I was like, "Oh," I may have said cool or cute or something like that. And I didn't notice that there was another picture behind that picture or under that picture in text messaging. So she called me and she said, did you see me on the bike? Did you see me on the bike?" I said, "Yeah, why were you on the bike?" And so she was describing the fact that one of Janae's friends, Janae was deceased by then, had come by. He was a young man and he had bought a bike for his wife, and he wanted to show it to Tina. A lot of Janae's friends were sort of looking in on her and kind of taking care of her from time to time. So they would stop by and say, "You need me to lift anything? You got dirt bags of dirt in your car. I can take them to the backyard," and stuff like that. So he came on the bike and he explained that the bike was his wife, and his wife hadn't even seen it. And he said, "You want to ride?" And Tina said, "Yes." Why did she say yes? So when she called me, she said, "Look at the other picture."
Okay, next slide.
She
Oh, no.
fell flat on her behind. So I said, "Tina, how old was the guy who, I'll just call him Joe? How old was Joe? And how old is his wife?" She said, "I think they're in their 20s." I said, "That's the problem. You are 70 some years old. Why the heck did you get on the bike?" She said, "I just sort of felt slow motion." And she is on the ground. You can't see her face, but she said she was laughing her head off.
It kind of, I think you can kind of see it in her eyes
Yeah,
that she's
yeah,
she's
Fell
laughing.
off the bike. So that was some fun that we had, and we talked about it on the podcast. We ran those pictures on the podcast,
Yeah.
and I just chastised her all over the place, like, "Don't ever do that again."
Next slide.
So this is Tina in her garden. Actually, it's the picture on the right is a day when three Spelman students, who were students at the time, they graduated, who were aspiring filmmakers, were working on a project, and I really don't. I think it has something to do with Gullah Geechee culture. And someone said, "You should go interview Tina McElroy Ansa." And so they drove from Atlanta to St. Simon's Island with all their equipment, and they were setting up in the garden. Now, Tina and I are very different. I'm a neat. I like things in order. So in my garden, there would be rows. In Tina's garden, there are weeds everywhere. And she never wore shoes. And she never cut her foot. She did fall down the steps once and hurt her foot, but other than that. So the students, when they got to her house, they said, "Well, why don't we just film you in the garden?" And so some of the footage that you saw at the beginning in the film was taken by some of the students who did produce it. And then they came back a second time and interviewed her personally, and that's the footage you saw in the film. But she raised a lot. She raised vegetables. She loved flowers. Her favorite flower was sunflowers. It's my least favorite flower because sunflowers flop over. I like flowers that stand up. So we're just so different. We were just so different. So that's Tina's garden. And these are just some random shots of us together over the years. We found out we took many, many road trips for the book tours. I have a book coming full circle, and our plan was that we were going to go on book tour together. And then her husband passed away when my book came out, and then there was COVID, so there was no book tour. There was a virtual book tour, but once we were able to get out, we just got in the car and we drove everywhere together because she wanted to be with me on the book tour. The bottom right is in 2016 when I got an honorary degree at Spelman, and Tina came with me. We took a road trip to Atlanta. She drove to Savannah, and then we got in the car together. And she introduced me the evening before the ceremony when I got the honorary degree. She already had an honorary degree from Spelman. The picture in the middle is standing in front of my husband's fish pond. He has a koi fish pond in the backyard. And the picture on the left is at my daughter's wedding in 2022.
Next slide.
And those are some road trip pictures. I just had to throw the road trip. That's all. That's something specific. We just love them.
Did you travel well together?
We did travel
Yeah.
well together. We couldn't sleep together in the same room because we
Okay.
were not good roommates,
Oh,
but we were great travel partners. Huh? Like I said, she was not neat. So I would get up every day and make up my bed. And Tina said, "Why should I make up the bed? I'm gonna get back in it tonight." So she didn't ever like to make up the bed. I didn't realize it at the time. I know now I have asthma, and I like the room cool with the window open a little bit. And Tina did not like that. I slept next to the window. You know these old cranky dorm rooms. We had a radiator, and the radiator was just very drying to me. Um, I went to bed at a reasonable time, and Tina was down the hall in the room with four. I think the room had 4 or 5 girls, and it was a big room playing bid whist all night. When we got our English assignments, we took all the English classes together. I would do my assignment like a 2-week paper or something, and I'd go to the library that day and start working on my research, and I would have it finished in a few days. Tina was up the night before it was due. What really pissed me off is we got the same grade. And they were mostly A's on our papers. But I'm like, I spent 2 weeks working on this paper. And she just comes in here the night before, keeping me awake with her light on and her typewriter.
I was gonna say, I think I saw in one of the podcast videos that it was a typewriter, an old-fashioned typewiter that she was using.
It was a manual typewriter.
Yeah.
She didn't like my typewriter because I had the only electric typewriter. I got it for high school graduation. And so they didn't like the sound. Nobody understood an electric typewriter back in the day. This was at Putnam County High School. This was our very first road trip after or during COVID. I mean, we were literally in the car with our mask on. We kept our mask on until we were actually doing the program. They put some microphones on us, and we had 4 or 5 students interviewing us. They had all read the book. The seniors had read the book, and the entire junior and senior classes came to the auditorium, and we spent the whole day at Putnam County talking about writing. That's the cover of the book. And then they made these little paddles with our pictures on them.
Uh-huh.
So they had like trivia questions, and then the kids, every kid had a paddle, and they would vote with the paddle.
Oh,
It was
like
very unique.
so was it like, is this Wanda or is this Tina?
Yes, exactly.
How
So-
often were they correct?
I don't remember. I
Okay.
don't remember, but it was a fun exercise. And I don't even know that I kept my paddle, but when I went to Tina's house the first time after she passed away, I just grabbed her paddle. I said, I'm keeping both of them because I had mine and so I now have hers. And this is the very last picture we took together. So in August of 2024, I was on St. Simon's Island for our sorority retreat. And I told Tina, I said, I'm going to be on the island. Why don't we just, have breakfast one day? And this was as I was leaving town after the retreat that Sunday morning. I skipped a little church service that we do and went and met her for breakfast. And we did not know that we were both going to show up in blue because that's Spelman's color. And so when we finished with breakfast, it was Tina who remembered, oh, we got to take a picture. We got to take a picture. I am so glad we took that picture. So that was the last time we took a picture. Not the last time I saw her, but the last time we took a picture.
Together.
Yeah. This is the last time. This is the last picture of Tina that we know about. She came to Savannah for the Kamala Harris event. She called me a few days before to say, "Are you going to be there?" And I said, "No, it's too close. Too much COVID still going around. Even as recently as last year, I really don't feel like because it was going to be in this arena with 20,000 people, and I did not go. She had a friend who came with her, and she texted me the picture while she was there. Said, "Guess who just came behind? Who I'm standing and I can actually see." And this is a picture of Joy, and so I love that.
That is a great picture.
And this is on St. Simon's Island. Stacy Abrams, who is also a Spelman alumna.
She and I went to the same high school.
Did you really? Okay.
She graduated a year before I started, but she was a legend.
Okay.
Yeah.
And she still is.
Yeah. I mean, like even then, like in the 90s.
Yeah. So she was coming to St. Simon's Island invited by some benefactors, some people who were raising money for her when she was running for governor. And they called Tina and said, we have a group of honorary chairs of this event. Would you allow us to use your name as an honorary? And Tina said, you know, I got no money, but you can use my name. And so at the end of that event, this is on the backyard of the lady whose house was in um, on the marsh. And Tina just wanted to sit down. She was truly an island girl, as I said. So she wanted to sit and look at the marsh, and someone took her picture. I don't know who took the picture, but it was one of the pictures she sent me. She texted me at the end of the event. And I just think that's the finale.
Yeah.
It just looks like Tina.
Yeah.
Last slide, right?
Yeah, this is the last one.
So
Yeah.
I've been collecting, since her death, I've been collecting the Tina-isms. I've gone back through the social media and through the text messages and through just my memory, and these are just some of the Tina-isms. I even have thought about writing a book called Tina-isms, if I can collect enough of them. At her memorial service here in Atlanta in November, one of her dear friends who's a faculty member at Clark Atlanta University called me and she said, I want to share some Tina-isms. And so she put 3 Tina-isms on a bookmark, and she had them reproduced. So everyone who came to the memorial service got the bookmark with Tina-isms. So, you know, so she always said these things. Writing is a state of grace. I don't have interpretations for all of them. Thinking time is writing time. Anybody here know who Bill Deal is? I never met him, but apparently he was a very well-known writer at some point. But he was a mentor of Tina, and he always said thinking time is writing time. And when I was writing my own memoir, she would call me and say, "Well, did you do any writing today?" And I said, "No, but I did a lot of thinking." She said, "That's writing time," so I got credit for it. Always remember we have agency. Tina loved to say that. And we especially said it when we were creating Meeting at the Table because she had forgotten that she had a publishing company. And when we started thinking about how important it was to have that book come out in 2020, by the end of 2020, I said, no publishing company is going to get it done that quickly. I said, wait a minute, don't you have a publishing company still? And so that was the agency we always used to talk about. Hard writing makes easy reading. I think she said that in the video. We may have not have seen that part of the video. But if you write hard, if it takes you a long time just for a sentence, and we did a lot of that when we were doing Meeting at the Table, it makes it so much easier to read. And sometimes when we were editing together on Zoom, I would say, oh, that's good enough. She said, no. We got to get the right word because it's easier to read. Ask for what you want. We always said that. And we have passed that down to so many people because people think, oh, they'll never give me fill in the blank, whether it's money or time or a job or the ability to publish a book. Ask for it because it doesn't cost anything to get a no. But sometimes the yes is very valuable. This is where you belong. We talked about that. She said that coming onto the island. Do it right now. Right now is the word she used in the film. She always talked about just, you can't wait. You got to get it done now. And don't go to heaven without using the gifts God gave you. Unwrap them suckers. One of my favorite.
Is it possible to play the end of that memorial video starting around 9 minutes and 40 seconds?
And while you're queuing it up, I will say that when we were planning the memorial service, I found one of the 3 young ladies who were Spelman students who graduated by then, and I just called a few people and said, what was her name? And they told me her name is Neema Griffin.
Okay.
Neema. She was the main producer. I even got a little credit on there. I'm so proud of that. And I said, Neema, don't you have some footage of Tina? And she said, yeah, but I only have what I took in the garden those 2 times. And I said, well, I know 2 other people who have footage. One is very old footage from the first Sea Island Writers Retreat. That's what you heard at the beginning. The sound is a little wonky. And the second was at the Tybee Sea Island Writers Retreat, which was just in 2022. And I said, let me call them and see if they'll send you the video that they have, and maybe you can work it in. And so That's how the film came about.
Some of us are going to get to heaven, and the first thing God's going to say to us is, hey, why didn't you open all those gifts I gave you? And arranged around the heavenly throne, there are going to be stacks and stacks of gaily and luxuriously wrapped presents with organza and roses tied to them and grosgrain ribbons and satin ribbons around them. And it's going to be full of gifts that God gave us that we never opened. Stop for a while. Think about it. What gifts do you have that you're not using? What packages did God give you that you haven't even opened yet? Don't go to heaven with your packages unwrapped. Unwrap them suckers.
Still got some time. So it came up at the end of the video, and I know I watched like some podcast episodes where it came up. Can you tell us a little bit more about Tina's Good Little Schoolgirls?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Good Little Schoolgirls, she always referenced as young, emerging Black women writers for the most part. There were a few men in there that would call her and say, "I'm working on this. What can I do?" Or, "I'm trying to get published. What can I do?" Or, "Would you read my?" And she would just mentor them over the phone, or she would meet people at
I think so.
Okay. She would meet people at book festivals and at retreats and places like that. And she always referred to them as her good little schoolgirls. And we talked on the podcast a lot about the importance of us mentoring people who look like us or who want to do what we did. Me in journalism and Tina as a fiction writer. I call mine my children, and I've done many speeches where I said, my children have done this, and my daughter doesn't mind that I use that term. She's actually proud of it, and Tina uses good little schoolgirls. So when Tina passed away, some of the good little schoolgirls started calling me. They were just devastated by the suddenness of her death, and they wanted to talk and they wanted to tell their stories. And so we brought back two old chicks who know a lot of stuff at the end, and we had an episode of the Good Little Schoolgirls, some of the Good Little Schoolgirls.
Yeah, and you can find that on YouTube. And it's well worth a watch. There's like 5 or 6 of them.
At least. Oh,
At
I
least,
think it's
maybe
more. It's more
maybe
like
more.
7 or 8 or
Okay,
9.
yeah,
of
I
them.
missed
Yeah,
yeah.
because it was a longer podcast
Oh,
than
that's
we
right.
should have had. It was like an hour and a half. I really wanted
It's
to
a
break
quick
it up
hour and
into
a
2.
half, though.
I hope so.
I think
I
so.
hope so. And Sybil Wilkes, if you've heard of Sybil Wilkes, she's the former newswoman on the Tom Joyner Morning Show. She claims she was Tina's first little schoolgirl. Tina always said, "I think you were second or third. I'm not sure you were first." But I called Sybil and said, because Sybil had called me to say, how sorry she was that we lost her. And I called her, I said, "I think I need to bring back the podcast." And Sybil had appeared on at least one episode, maybe 2 episodes of our podcast. And I said, "Would you be my co-host on the last 2 old chicks?" So she was. Ask for what you want, okay?
Something else that I had a question about. So I watched an episode of, I'm forgetting the name of the podcast now, but Gina sent it to me. It was where you and Tina were being interviewed, mostly talking about meeting at the table. And
Marcy Thomas
yes,
was the
Marcy,
interviewer.
thank you.
She lives right here I think in Marietta.
Okay, so not super far.
She's from Savannah.
So on that podcast episode, Tina mentioned that she was working on another novel. Do you know anything about that? Do you know if she got close to finishing or?
Yes, so Tina was working on a novel and a nonfiction book. She had never done a nonfiction book until we did Meeting at the Table, but she was determined to do a nonfiction book. And I remember the title of the nonfiction book, which I don't think she got very far on, was something, it had the title Bogart Queens, because she realized that Black women really have a lot of gumption. We just bogart our way into any place and do anything we want to do. But she was working on a novel, and I do believe she was close to finishing it. And that first time that we went into her house, a few days after she passed away, with her nephew and another friend, my daughter came from Florida to be with me because she knew that I needed her. Because Tina was her aunt, truly her aunt Tina. My daughter found the laptop, and she opened it, and it was an old laptop, so it didn't have a code in it. You know, you just open it, and it comes up. And she said, "Mom, I think this is a novel."
Oh, wow.
So Tina's nephew, his name is Kelvin, Brigadier General Kelvin, took everything out of the house and put it in storage. Everything's in storage and Macon, including the laptop. On Sunday of this weekend, Kelvin and I are going to go into the storage unit together, along with a museologist. That's someone who studies the world of museums. It's not about music, it's museology. A friend who is a faculty, I met her at Savannah State when I came to Savannah. We're going to go to Macon and we're going to look at the laptop, because my goal is to preserve Tina's legacy. So there are several things that we're doing, but that novel is in there. I don't know how close it was, and I may have to give it to a fiction writer, because I'm not a fiction writer, to read it and see if that person can perhaps end it, if it's not ended, but it's on that laptop.
Oh, that's so neat.
Yeah. So hopefully someday
Yeah.
we'll have another novel by Tina McElroy.
Okay.
And I hope we can publish it under the imprint of
Yeah.
Down South Press.
That would be
Mhm.
full circle.
Yes, it would.
Yeah. Any questions from the audience?
Yeah. Hi, Natalie. Yeah, I can't tell you the details yet because I think this is going to be archived, so I'm not going to tell you the details. But there is a plan to revive and continue the Sea Island Writers Retreat. It is likely, possibly going to be in Macon. We possibly have the location. It's not going to be this year or next. It may not even be next year. But her nephew and his wife have talked to me about wanting to do something. I've also been in touch with people like you who want to have it continued. And so there's even someone who has volunteered to run it. I told her I would work with her the first time and pass along what I can. But hopefully we will have some more Sea Island Writers Retreats. Yeah. Yes.
I understand you guys met as freshmen at Spelman. If you had to choose 3 to 4 words to describe Tina from freshman to her end, what 4 words would those be?
I would say creative. Um, the first one is creative. Um, risk taker. Um, proud Black woman. That's 3 words, but that's a good description of her. Supportive. She was supportive of me as I was supportive of her. We always had each other's backs.
I think supportive says a lot.
Mhm.
About the retreat. Creative.
Yes. Yeah. Microphone recording.
Other questions? Oh, Pearl's got a question. We could pass the mic that way.
Thank Mike.
Thank you so much for bringing the word that always comes to my mind for Tina is joy. And you
Yes.
talked a lot about that with joy. And I just wanted to tell this story about in 1996, there was a international celebration of Southern literature held at Agnes Scott as part of the Cultural Olympiad before the Olympics came in the summer. And Tina was invited to be a part of that. And she read, I think it was The Hand I Fan With, and that sent up a big stir. But she was up there, she was just totally herself, just enjoying the whole thing, and so happy to be among the international writers and novelists and people who were here to celebrate. Southern culture.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank
Lester.
you.
What's your name?
I'm Pearl McCaney.
Nice to meet you. Thank you.
We have a question over here. Okay. And I think this will be our last one, and then we'll wrap up.
Thank you for this. Feel free to disagree. I get the feeling that the driver, perhaps, of her joy was something that's easy to overlook, practicality.
Can you elaborate?
Yeah. Can you elaborate? Can you use the microphone?
For instance, spirituality.
Definitely spirituality.
An
And
eight-
not just spirituality in terms of religion, just a very spiritual person, you know. But as she was Catholic, she grew up Catholic. She went to all Catholic schools, parochial schools through high school. And every time we ate, you know, many of us say a blessing, but Tina would reach out with both hands and grab my hands, and including that last time we had breakfast. And she would just be so spiritual and close her eyes, and she'd just squeeze your hands while she's praying. But she also spiritual because of the spirits were all throughout her work. You know, Herman was a spirit, and so much other. Madir in Ugly Ways was talking from the grave. Absolutely.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you all so much. And for anybody who came in a little bit late, Gina said at the beginning that we're all invited to a little reception afterwards. There's some snacks and whatnot in the lobby. And there are books for sale, including Wanda's book. Hope to see you all out there. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Nice having you all here.